Hey guys, tonight we begin with a quiet question that has hovered at the edge of our awareness for decades. UFOs at nuclear sites, coincidence or warning? Tonight, we will move slowly, gently, and carefully through that question. We'll listen to history, to witness voices, to the hum of machines, and to the silences between the reports. We will weigh events that feel measured and deliberate, and we will allow the possibility, ever so softly that these encounters might be more than chance. Over the course of our journey, we will explore many things: the surprising pattern of sightings around missiles and reactors, the first moments after the dawn of the nuclear age, startling incidents at military bases, stories from both sides of the old Iron Curtain, strange encounters beneath the waves, and the testimonies of people who carried this knowledge in their bones for years. We will listen to scientists and skeptics, to pilots and watchstanders, to declassified pages and the whispers that never made it into the file. We will also gently consider why something, or someone, might pay attention to our most dangerous inventions. Tonight's telling will be calm, measured, and rich with detail. I will share documented reports and credible eyewitness accounts, and I will weave in carefully imagined threads where they help to illuminate the larger picture, imagined only to bridge gaps, to help us picture what might be happening, not to confuse truth with invention. I invite you to rest into the voice, to let the images form softly behind your eyes, and to stay until the very last chapter. There are moments and revelations later in this documentary that gently reframe the whole story, little surprises and quiet confirmations that make the ending worth hearing. Before we settle in and begin our peaceful journey, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if what I share here truly resonates with you. Your support helps me create more of these videos, and if you feel like it, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see the many corners of the world where we connect. Now, dim the lights, make yourself comfortable, and let's ease into tonight's journey together as we explore what lies ahead. Chapter 1. The Pattern No one wanted to see. There is a certain stillness that comes before understanding, a pause like the held breath of a sleepwalker. When reports began to trickle in, scattered and quiet at first, that stillness grew into a pattern, not a loud, clanging pattern, but a patient, recurrent one. Bright objects, silent shapes, and unexplained lights appearing in the skies near places where humanity stored its most terrible power. Imagine, for a moment, a map lit not by cities but by guarded perimeters, clusterings of geometric fences, radar domes turning slowly, concrete pads and long rows of silos. These are the places designed to be most secure, and they occupy a particular psychological landscape, a landscape of vigilance, of trained eyes, of protocols that run like clockwork. It is within this careful architecture that the pattern begins to feel unsettling. Real reports from the early Cold War show the beginnings of this. In the decades after World War II, air traffic controllers, radar operators, and security personnel, people whose jobs made them conservative by nature, began writing short clinical notes about objects they could not identify. These were not typically flashy magazine accounts. They were logbook entries, terse phone calls, and messages routed through military channels. The reports came from many nations: the United States, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and others. That repetition mattered. When trained observers in different countries, operating distinct security systems and separated by language and ideology, all note similar anomalies near sensitive nuclear sites, the coincidence shrinks. Picture an early morning watch on a chilly base, breath visible in the light, the tip of a cigarette glowing for a moment beyond the fence. A guard looks up and sees a slow, silent light that seems to hang exactly above a silo. A radar operator in a control room 200 miles away sees a blip that appears where nothing should be. A pilot training overhead reports a craft moving in ways inconsistent with any known aircraft. Each of these instances, considered alone, is eerie. Taken together, they begin to form a pattern. There is also the human rhythm of secrecy and fear. During the Cold War, officers understood that any oddity near a nuclear asset demanded caution. Reports were often routed up chains of command that were busy with their own pressures. Some incidents were logged and quietly buried in classified archives. Others were dismissed by procedures meant to reduce false alarms. Yet the same essential detail recurred. These objects often approached or lingered near facilities associated with missiles, reactors, or weapons storage. To help you feel this more clearly, picture a corridor of intelligence analysts in a windowless room, screens casting soft light on their faces. They exchange terse notes, assemble timelines, and try to separate instrument error from something unexplained. Now imagine that after months of collecting data, one analyst draws a line on a map linking sightings, not random points, but network threaded through nuclear infrastructure. The line becomes a quiet insistence. Someone or something was paying attention to the places we most feared. It is here that we introduce a subtle, fictional layer, a small, plausible imagination, to fill in the spaces where the official record goes quiet. In late 1959, perhaps, a closed-door memorandum circulates among a narrow circle of defense analysts. It is not a headline document. It carries a plain distribution list and a single sentence that causes people to look twice, patterns emerging near strategic nuclear assets. The briefing suggests correlation, not causation, and it urges continued vigilance. The memo is not a verdict. It is a hypothesis with teeth. This imagined document helps us to feel the union of mundane procedure and creeping wonder. It reminds us that the people tasked with protecting these sites were not thinking in mythic terms. They were watching instruments, cross-checking logs, and worrying about false positives. Yet even they, trained, methodical, skeptical, could not entirely explain the cluster of reports. So why does this pattern feel so unnerving? Part of the reason is scale. Nuclear installations are not casual targets. They're carefully monitored, heavily guarded, and technologically layered. If a single anomalous object repeatedly appears around such locations, we must ask whether it is simply a fluke of observation or something more concerted. Another part of the unease comes from intent, the looming question of why anything would be interested in what we call deterrence, the capacity to destroy on a massive scale. In this chapter, we will not yet decide intent. Instead, we listen to the clipped wording of log entries, to the hush of guard towers at night, to the low murmur of radar rooms. We collect details. We note that sightings are not confined to one nation, one era, or one kind of installation. They cross borders quietly, like migrating birds that pay particular attention to certain clustered feeding grounds. There are patterns within patterns. Sometimes the sightings happen during tests or exercises. Sometimes they occur without any apparent provocation. Some reports describe shapes hovering with a calm, almost clinical precision. Others speak of lights that dart and vanish. The instruments tell their own stories, radar returns that fade into nothing, cameras that catch a luminescent streak, instruments that record transient electromagnetic interference around control systems. These technical details are not showy. They are small, precise footprints left by events that collectively resist an easy explanation. To keep you listening, let me gently promise that later chapters will carry specific names and locations that anchor these patterns to real, well-documented incidents. We will sit with the people who saw these things, the officers, the technicians, the quiet watchstanders, and we'll hear how their lives were altered by a single shift in what they knew about the world. We will also examine the technical anomalies recorded during such visits, logs that show instrumentation dropouts, systems that briefly failed, and the strange coincidences that tethered the sightings to the machinery of deterrence. For now, allow the thought to sit with you like a warm weight. Across different countries and different systems, there is a repeated observation of things that should not easily be there. The pattern is not loud, but it is consistent. The tone of the reports is often flat and clinical, which to my ear makes them only more compelling, because those who reported them had little reason to embroider and everything to lose by being wrong. And so, our first chapter closes not with a finality, but with an invitation. We do not yet claim knowledge. We only point out the way the threads seem to gather, around fences, above silos, along coastlines where submarines surface. We invite you to follow those threads with us, gently and patiently, as we move deeper into specific cases and testimonies that will help shape what this pattern might mean. Later in this series, we will return to the map to connect the dots we have traced here to named incidents and to the voices of the people who lived them. We will pause with the technical documents, with radar plots and handwritten logs, and with the softer human recollections that round out the cold lines of the files. For now, rest into the slow unfolding of this story. Imagine the hemisphere of the world, soft lit by night, dotted with watchtowers and quiet control rooms, and know that across those distances a repeated observation tugs at the edges of our certainty. Chapter 2. The First Alarms, UFOs and the Birth of the Nuclear Age. As we continue, allow your breathing to slow just a little more, as though the world itself is exhaling. The story now drifts backward in time, to a moment when the night sky first changed its meaning for humanity. Long before satellites traced neat lines overhead, before warning systems hummed quietly in underground bunkers, there was a single, blinding realization. Humanity had learned how to split the atom. In August of 1945, when the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, something fundamental shifted. Not only geopolitically, not only scientifically, but energetically. Many researchers and witnesses have quietly suggested that this moment was like striking a cosmic bell. A signal rang out, not just across nations, but perhaps far beyond Earth itself. The explosions were brief, yet their implications were vast, and the radiation they released altered the environment in ways never before seen. What followed, in the months and years after, was not immediate panic, but a subtle change in the background noise of the world. Pilots returning from routine flights began to mention unfamiliar lights pacing their aircraft. Radar operators noticed returns that behaved unlike any plane or weather formation. These reports increased steadily, not in random bursts, but in a pattern that seemed to mirror the expansion of nuclear testing and weapons development. The late 1940s and early 1950s were a time of rapid militarization of the skies. Jet aircraft were new, radar was still evolving, and the Cold War was quietly crystallizing. In this environment, one might expect confusion or misidentification. Yet many of the individuals making these reports were among the most qualified observers available. Fighter pilots trained to recognize aircraft silhouettes at a glance. Radar technicians who understood the quirks of their systems intimately. When they said something didn't behave like anything known, that statement carried weight. One of the most intriguing aspects of this era is how closely the surge in sightings track the timeline of nuclear tests. After the Trinity test in New Mexico, and later atmospheric detonations in the Pacific and Nevada deserts, reports increased not only near the test sites, but along flight paths, coastlines, and military installations tied to nuclear research. It was as if the activity rippled outward, touching multiple layers of the defense infrastructure. Popular belief, which still persists today, holds that nuclear detonations may have acted as a kind of beacon. The idea is simple and unsettling. The sudden release of immense energy, combined with radiation unfamiliar to natural planetary processes, may have stood out against the quiet background of space, not as a message intentionally sent, but as an unmistakable signature, a declaration that a new technological threshold had been crossed. To imagine this more clearly, picture Earth before 1945 as a softly glowing ember in the darkness, alive but relatively quiet in cosmic terms. Then, in an instant, a flash brighter than the sun blooms on its surface. That flash repeats, again and again, as tests multiply. Even if one does not assume intent or intelligence beyond our world, it is not difficult to imagine such events being detectable by advanced observation technologies wherever they might exist. There are stories from this period that remain particularly compelling. In 1947, during what would later be called the modern UFO era, reports surged across the United States. While public attention focused on civilian sightings, military files quietly accumulated their own cases. Objects tracked visually and on radar that could accelerate rapidly, hover without wings, and vanish at speeds far beyond known aircraft. Many of these encounters occurred near airfields involved in nuclear research or transport. Here, we gently introduce another plausible fictional layer, one that fits seamlessly into the culture of secrecy at the time. Imagine a classified post-war memo circulated among a small circle of scientists and defense officials. Its language is cautious, even understated. It does not speak of visitors or intent. Instead, it poses a question: whether recent unexplained aerial phenomena could be correlated with nuclear activity. One line buried in technical phrasing stands out. The timing suggests an external awareness of our tests. This imagined memo is not meant to sensationalize, but to reflect a mindset that would have been natural in that era, a mix of scientific curiosity and strategic anxiety. Officials were already grappling with the implications of nuclear power on geopolitics. The possibility that it might also draw outside attention, however faintly considered, would have added a new and deeply unsettling dimension. Internationally, similar patterns emerged. In the Soviet Union, where nuclear development was pursued with equal intensity and secrecy, military personnel also reported strange aerial encounters. Though fewer documents were released publicly, later accounts suggest that Soviet radar stations experienced unexplained tracks shortly after their own test began. Again, the reports clustered near sensitive facilities rather than civilian areas. What is remarkable is the restraint shown in these early years. Despite the tension of the Cold War, despite the fear of espionage and surprise attack, there were no recorded attempts to aggressively engage these objects in a sustained way. Interceptions were attempted, yes, but often failed. The objects would simply outpace or outmaneuver the pursuing aircraft. This restraint suggests that military leaders themselves may not have fully understood what they were dealing with, and chose caution over escalation. For those stationed at these bases, the experience was quietly transformative. Imagine a young radar operator, alone during a night shift, watching a blip appear and disappear in ways that defy his training manuals. He logs the event, follows protocol, and goes home at dawn with a strange weight in his chest. He does not speak of it openly. He tells himself there must be an explanation. Yet the memory stays, resurfacing decades later, when similar stories emerged from others. As the nuclear age matured, the sightings did not fade. Instead, they evolved alongside technology. Radar improved, jets became faster, and reporting systems more standardized. Yet the core mystery remained. Why now? Why here? Why around nuclear technology specifically? This chapter plants a quiet seed that will grow as we continue. The idea that humanity's step into the nuclear era may have altered its visibility in the universe. Not in a dramatic science fiction sense, but in a subtle, detectable way, like a lighthouse suddenly illuminated on a dark shore. In the chapters ahead, we will move from this broad historical backdrop into specific, deeply unsettling cases where the interaction between these unknown objects and nuclear systems became impossible to ignore. We will slow down, examine timelines, and listen closely to first-hand voices. For now, let the image settle of a world newly awakened to its own power, and perhaps newly observed because of it. Chapter 3. Malmstrom Air Force Base, when missiles went silent. Settle deeper now, allow your shoulders to loosen and your breath to find an even rhythm. Tonight we go to a cold, quiet place on the map. An Air Force base tucked into wide-open country, a place of concrete pads and watchtowers where the night air carries the low hum of generators and the endless, practiced calm of personnel who have trained to respond without panic. This is Malmstrom, a location that, for a handful of people one night, changed the texture of what they believed possible. Imagine the scene as it might have been. A launch control facility, a low-windowed building built to be functional rather than beautiful. Inside, men and women sat at consoles, their faces lit by soft instrument panels, the steady beat of routine all around them. Outside, bunkered in the earth, lay rows of Minuteman missiles, long, silent cylinders pointing at horizons that stretched into cold distance. The systems were redundant, tested, and trusted. Protocols were written in thick manuals. The potency of these installations is hard to overstate. They are designed to be the last, most deliberate instrument of national power. On that night, several of those missiles unexpectedly went offline. The records, as reported by those who later told the story, show a sudden, coordinated interruption. Indicators that should have remained green went dark. Launch circuits that normally hummed with steady signals showed anomalous readings, and the consoles that monitored the missiles lit up with error flags. Technicians and officers moved through the checklist, confirm the fault, isolate the cause, attempt a remote reboot. The expected steps did not restore normal operations. Engineers were baffled. Into this technical dissonance stepped a witness, a young lieutenant on duty in the launch control facility, Robert Salas. His voice when he later recounted the events was clear and calm, the kind of voice shaped by years of protocol and training. He described something that, for him and for others present, reframed the issue from mere malfunction to an encounter. He and a security guard had seen a glowing object in the sky above one of the silo fields. The light was not the predictable sweep of a searchlight or the steady beam of a floodlight. It was a strange luminescence that seemed to hover, then descend to a point above a single missile site. Picture this glow against the wide Montana sky, a soft, steady brightness in an area meant for careful observation and immediate response. For those inside the facility, all attention snapped to the external sensors and to the radios. Security personnel were dispatched, calls were made up the chain. On the other end, missile crews and higher command realized that several warheads had lost their readiness status. The correlation between the sighting and the system failures was arresting. Engineers later examined the missiles and their control systems. Mechanical integrity was intact. The circuits, when inspected under laboratory conditions, functioned normally. Yet the instruments had registered an anomaly at a particular moment, a moment that coincided with the nearby sighting. Attempts to reproduce the fault under controlled conditions failed. The evidence, as shelved in reports and recounted in testimonies, suggested an interference that the technicians could neither trace nor replicate. We imagine gently a fictional technical annex inserted into a heavier file, a suppressed addendum that uses clinical language to sketch what the engineers feared but could not fully state. It describes transient, localized electromagnetic disturbances, a sequence of control pulses not generated by any known component, and a brief override of safing codes that the technicians could not explain. The annex concludes with a cautious observation. The pattern indicates an external influence of unknown origin. This imagined document is not dramatic on its face, it is sober, almost bureaucratic. Its power rests in its banality, a plain sentence that carries the weight of an extraordinary possibility. There are many ways to account for what happened. One possibility is technological failure, age, maintenance issues, or a coincidental cascade of component faults. Another is human error, perhaps a misapplied procedure or an unnoticed configuration change. Yet those explanations strain against the specifics. Multiple missiles affected nearly simultaneously, systems unable to be restarted through standard protocols, and the timing aligning with an eyewitness account of an object in the sky. It is in the tension between mundane causes and the improbable combination of events that the story gains its gravity. Consider the human reactions in the room, the steadying of voices over the radio, the slow, practiced cadence of emergency checklists, the quiet exchange of measurements and times. Those who were there later spoke not of panic, but of a deep, professional unease. They completed their duty, they logged the event. They would carry the memory with them for decades, sometimes burying it beneath the routines of family and work until, in retirement, the burden of silence felt heavier than the consequence of speaking. There is also the technical aura to consider. Missiles and their control systems are built with layers of redundancy precisely to prevent unintended deactivation. If a single system fails, multiple backups are supposed to keep the asset in its intended state. For multiple independent systems to register anomalies at once suggests either a coordinated failure across subsystems or an external factor capable of interacting with them simultaneously. That is where speculation and sober inquiry meet. What sort of phenomenon could produce such coordinated transient interference without leaving obvious physical damage? Some researchers have pointed to electromagnetic interference, a focused pulse of energy that could upset guidance or telemetry systems without physically destroying hardware. Others have theorized about directed energy, particle events, or even subtle manipulations of logic circuits through phenomena not fully understood. Each theory attempts to hold the uncomfortable detail. The missiles were not destroyed, only rendered temporarily inert. The effect was not to annihilate but to disable, and that nuance matters deeply when we try to interpret intention. The emotional core of the Malmström narrative is not fear alone, but a mixture of bewilderment and responsibility. For those in command, the knowledge that an asset could be taken offline, even briefly, by an unknown cause is unnerving. It raises questions about vulnerability and about the stability of deterrent strategies. For observers like Lieutenant Salas, the events moved from the professional to the personal. He began to ask, quietly and persistently, who or what would choose to demonstrate such capability without overtly harming people or infrastructure. To keep you listening, let me softly foreshadow. Later chapters will bring forward voices from other bases with eerily similar flourishes of detail. They will speak of lights, of instrument anomalies, and of the same odd restraint in effect. Patterns echo across time and place. We will gather these echoes and let them build toward a broader mosaic. As we sit with the texture of that night, imagine again the landscape, the cold earth, the hulking silhouette of a silo, a single strange light hanging in space that felt both near and profoundly distant. For the technicians, the documents, and the officers who reviewed the data afterward, the question became less about whether something unusual had occurred and more about what it signified. Was it an inadvertent interference, a sensor artifact, or an intentional disabling, a literal demonstration that our most dangerous instruments could be interrupted by an unknown agency? There is one final human detail worth holding. Those who later spoke out did so cautiously. They were not seeking fame. They sought to place their experience on a record, to add a careful testimony to a folder that otherwise gathered dust. Many of them retired from service and lived quiet lives, returning occasionally to the memory of that night like one who revisits a shore where a ship once passed. There is a small imprint on the sand, and though the tide covers it, the shape lingers in the mind. As we close this chapter, let your breathing remain steady. Know that this account is more than a list of anomalies. It is a human story about responsibility, disbelief, and the way an extraordinary night can alter a career, a life, and the quiet assumptions of an entire institution. We will hold Malmstrom in our minds as a hinge, one of the places where the abstract pattern we first traced acquired a name, faces, and documents. In the chapters ahead, we will continue to meet other witnesses, and those meetings will slowly, gently, deepen the puzzle. Chapter 4: Messages Without Words. Stay with me now, breathing slowly as though the world itself has softened its edges. We move gently from the sharp certainty of malfunctioning machines into something quieter, more subtle, and perhaps more unsettling. This chapter is not about explosions or battles, not about invasion or fear. It is about restraint, about what was done, just as importantly as what was never done. As reports accumulated from nuclear sites across the world, a strange consistency began to reveal itself. Whatever these objects were, they did not behave like weapons. They did not strike, destroy, or escalate. Instead, they appeared, lingered, interfered, and then left. Again and again, the same pattern emerged. Systems were disrupted, missiles disabled, alarms triggered, but never once did a nuclear weapon detonate as a result of these encounters. This detail matters more than it might seem at first. Nuclear systems are unforgiving. They're designed to function under extreme conditions, but they are also inherently dangerous. Any interference carries risk. If an outside force wished to harm or dominate, the most devastating demonstration would be obvious, yet that never happened. The restraint itself becomes the message. Imagine how this must have looked from the inside of command structures. Senior officers and analysts reviewing incident summaries would notice the same strange footnote repeating itself. No permanent damage, no casualties, no escalation. The events were disruptive enough to be impossible to ignore, but limited enough to defy easy classification as attack. It was as though someone were tapping on the glass rather than shattering it. Over time, a quiet theory began to circulate, never formally endorsed, never written into doctrine, but spoken of in secure rooms and careful conversations. The idea was simple. These encounters were demonstrations, not assaults, a showing of capability without aggression, a way of saying without words that control was possible, but deliberately not exercised to its fullest extent. To understand why this interpretation gained traction, we must slow down and look closely at behaviour. Across dozens of cases spanning continents and decades, the objects behaved in remarkably similar ways. They approached nuclear assets. They were detected visually and on instruments. They often caused temporary system disruptions, and then they departed, leaving behind confusion, reports and questions, but no wreckage, no bodies, no craters. In military thinking, this kind of behaviour has a name, though it is rarely spoken aloud outside strategic circles. We might imagine a whispered intelligence phrase, passed carefully from one analyst to another, demonstrative restraint. The idea that an actor reveals superiority while intentionally holding back, ensuring the message is received without provoking retaliation. This concept is not foreign to human history. Nations conduct exercises near borders. Aircraft fly just outside controlled airspace. Submarines surface briefly where they can be seen. These actions are meant to signal presence and capability, not to initiate war. When viewed through this lens, the nuclear UFO encounters take on a different tone, less chaotic, more deliberate. Consider again the Malmstrom incident now seen through this frame. The missiles were not destroyed. They were not permanently altered. They were simply rendered inert for a short period of time, long enough to be noticed, documented, and deeply unsettling. If the purpose was sabotage, why leave the systems intact? If the purpose were terror, why leave no lasting damage? The same pattern appears elsewhere. In multiple accounts, witnesses describe objects positioning themselves with uncanny precision over missile silos or reactor facilities, not drifting randomly, but hovering directly above specific points, as if guided by detailed knowledge of what lay beneath. That knowledge alone implies a level of observation and understanding that is difficult to dismiss. For the people who experienced these events firsthand, the emotional impact was complex. Fear was present, certainly, but it was often overshadowed by confusion and a strange sense of being evaluated. Guards and officers later spoke of the feeling that they were not the focus. The weapons were, as though the humans on site were incidental observers to an interaction between the unknown objects and the machines humanity had built. Let us imagine one such guard, standing alone near a perimeter fence in the deep of night. The air is still. The facility behind him hums softly with power. Above, a light appears, steady and silent, hanging in the sky with impossible calm. It does not rush. It does not flee when noticed. It simply remains, as if allowing itself to be seen. The guard radios in, voice controlled but tight. Moments later, alarms inside the facility flicker. Then, just as quietly, the light lifts away and vanishes. What is communicated in such a moment? Not language, not symbols, not sound, but implication. You see this. We see you. This can be done. Some researchers have suggested that the absence of overt communication is itself intentional. Any direct message, spoken or written, could be misinterpreted, politicized or weaponized. But an action, repeated consistently across cultures and decades, carries a clarity that words often lack. Disable, but do not destroy. Demonstrate, but do not dominate. This interpretation also helps explain why the encounters often occurred at night, and why they rarely involved large numbers of witnesses. The goal did not seem to be mass spectacle. Instead, the audience appeared to be very specific: military personnel, command structures, and the systems themselves. The people most directly responsible for nuclear weapons were the ones who noticed. There is also a profound philosophical dimension to this idea. Nuclear weapons are not just tools of war, they are symbols of self-annihilation. They represent humanity's ability to erase itself in a matter of hours. If an external intelligence were concerned with long-term planetary stability, or with the preservation of a life more broadly, nuclear arsenals would naturally draw attention. In this light, the encounters begin to resemble interventions rather than threats. Not interventions in the sense of control or occupation, but in the sense of boundaries being quietly indicated. A reminder, delivered without judgment, that certain lines exist and that they are visible. Critics often argue that such interpretations anthropomorphize the unknown, projecting human motives onto phenomena we do not understand. That's a fair caution. Yet the consistency of behavior still demands explanation. Random natural phenomena do not selectively interfere with nuclear command and control systems. Human adversaries rarely show such uniform restraint across opposing nations, and so, among analysts and witnesses alike, a reluctant consensus began to form. Whatever was happening, it appeared purposeful. The question shifted from "is this hostile?" to "what is being communicated?" This shift had quiet consequences. Some officers reportedly changed how they thought about deterrence. Some engineers began to wonder whether nuclear weapons were as controllable as doctrine assumed. And some witnesses, long after leaving service, described a lingering sense that humanity was being watched not with hatred, but with concern. As we move forward in this documentary, we will encounter cases where this restraint is tested, where the interaction appears to come dangerously close to escalation, only to stop short. Each of those moments adds weight to the idea that something was being demonstrated, carefully and deliberately, over a long period of time. For now, let this thought settle gently, that the silence, the absence of destruction, may be the loudest part of the message, that in the quiet disabling of our most destructive tools, there may be an implicit question being asked, one that does not demand an answer in words, but in choices. Breathe slowly. Let the idea drift, rather than press. We're not rushing toward conclusions here. We're simply listening, noticing patterns, and allowing them to form a picture that is at once unsettling and strangely calm. Chapter 5. Across the Iron Curtain. Soviet Nuclear Encounters. Settle back now, let the shoulders loosen, let the breath find an even, unhurried tempo. The story we tell tonight does not remain on one side of a map. It crosses lines, oceans and ideologies, to places where language changes but the hum of generators and the low vigilance of watchrooms feel exactly the same. Behind barbed wire and beneath concrete, in the grey winter light of the north and the wide steppe of the east, the Soviet nuclear complex kept its own quiet hours. And in those hours, like elsewhere in the world, strange things were sometimes seen. Imagine, for a moment, the Soviet base in winter. Snow hushes the world, tracks sink and vanish in white. Men move in heavy coats, breath visible in the air, their steps measured by rhythm and duty. The installations were vast and secret, scattered from the western plains to the depths of Siberia. They were places built to be invisible, deep-rooted in discipline and procedure. The culture surrounding those sites prized technical certainty, logs, protocols, and chains of strict command. And yet, in several accounts that would later surface, personnel there recorded anomalies that resembled what others in the West had been documenting for decades. Let us be gentle with names and precise with tone. In Ukraine and in remote Siberian regions, declassified and later released testimonies describe glowing craft observed over missile fields and reactor sites. Radar operators reported transient blips that did not conform to known aircraft signatures. Watchmen described quiet lights that hovered above launch positions, sometimes initiating automatic sequences in systems that should have been closed to such influence. These accounts were not shouted into newspapers at the time. They were logged in secure books, noted in closed reports, and sometimes discussed only in whispered conversation among those who had seen what could not be explained. To understand the weight of these stories, consider the mindset of the people who told them. Soviet officers and technicians were trained to disbelieve rumor. Their world was one of precision, instruments, calibration, verified readings. When they reported something anomalous, it was not because they enjoyed mystery. it was because the mystery interfered with their purpose. When a radar sweep produced a pattern that drifted and hovered like a soundless fish, the technicians who logged it did so out of obligation, and often with worry that their report would be dismissed or worse, attract scrutiny they could not afford. Among these accounts is a particularly unsettling story, often repeated in later interviews and memoirs, of a moment when a sequence that looked very much like a launch initiation began to flicker on control panels. The narrative is slow and precise. An operator notices a series of signals. Status lights that should remain dark begin to display activity as though a remote command had begun to route a launch sequence. The room fills with a measured alarm. Technicians consult procedure. Senior officers are called. Then, as quickly as it began, the sequence halts. No trajectory is initiated, no missile departs. Yet the impression left behind is clear. Something had the capacity to touch the systems of a launch, to nudge them toward action, and to stop short. It is a story that chills the spine, but let us allow the fear to soften into thought. What would it mean if the same phenomenon that hovered in Montana also touched a silo in Siberia? It would suggest a consistency of behavior across ideological divides, an attention not to nationality, but to the instrument itself. The object of interest, it would seem, was the technology and what it represented. The human capacity for destruction concentrated into checked, mechanical pulses. We will fold in a careful fictional layer now, a quiet imagining that fits naturally into the culture of secrecy that existed in those times. Picture, in a secure facility somewhere behind the Iron Curtain, a phone line set up in the hush of night, a direct channel for incidents that could not be categorized by normal reporting. The line has a single purpose: to receive calls about unidentified aerospace interference. It is used sparingly, a rank-and-file lifeline for those who fear being dismissed. The existence of such a hotline is part imagination and part metaphor. It helps express the isolation of those who observe strange things and had no comfortable place to take them. This imagined hotline underscores a truth we will return to. People on both sides of the geopolitical fence often reacted the same way. They noted, they logged, and they worried. They did not have the cultural bandwidth to publish sensational accounts without risking career ruin or political fallout. So many waited until retirement, until the pressure eased and the fear of reprisal quieted, before telling their stories. There is a rhythm to these testimonies that deserves attention. In the immediate aftermath of seeing something unknown, witnesses describe a slide from alertness to a hard, mechanical calm. Protocol takes over, phones are called, reports are generated. Those are the outward actions. The inward effect is often different. A lingering unease, a new calibration of what is considered possible. People return home to families and do not speak of what they saw. The memory becomes a private lodestone, shaping later reflections and sometimes leading to public testimony, when the witness feels safe enough to speak. Why would an unknown object show such care in avoiding nationwide hysteria? Why disable but not destroy? In the Soviet context as in the West, the gesture reads similarly. A demonstration directed at the system, not the people. It is an intervention at the level of infrastructure. This consistent conduct suggests intelligence about the targets, knowledge of where systems are and how they behave. It implies observation that is meticulous rather than random. That in turn raises the deeper question that begins to hum beneath our narrative tonight. What is being preserved by this restraint? We will breathe through this idea with the softness it deserves. Nuclear arsenals are not just arrays of metal and explosive potential. They are statements about human choice. They say that a species has learned not only how to destroy, but how to threaten destruction on an industrial scale. If an external intelligence were concerned with long-term outcomes, the presence of such arsenals could be seen as an existential fault line, One might imagine that observers would pay close, repeated attention to the instruments of that capacity. In the Soviet memoirs and interviews that surfaced later, a tragicomic detail often appears: the clash between institutional pride and the intrusion of the inexplicable. Officers who once only thought in terms of ranges and angles were forced by a single event to consider the metaphysical. Their training offered no category for what they had seen, so they adapted, folding the phenomenon into a technical report, a note in a ledger, a silence between colleagues. Later, in calmer years, some of them would speak with a softness that only time can form. They would describe the glow, the radar whisper, the muted control room panic, and then a peace that came with the object's departure. There are also cases that reach beyond the military narrative, hints that the phenomenon intersected with civilian life. Fishermen in remote northern seas reported lights in the sky that matched descriptions given by radar operators inland. Railway workers noticed disruptions in signalling that coincided with nighttime sightings above distant plant sites. These cross-domain echoes deepen the texture of the phenomenon, suggesting it was not limited to a single institutional lens. As we continue, let us fold in another small fictional, if image, that will help us hold the scene. Imagine a weathered scientist in a Soviet institute poring over graphs that show transient electromagnetic spikes during periods of unusual aerial activity. He adjusts dials, nudges a chart, and frowns. His notes are careful and cautious, concluded with a single sentence: "External source of interference cannot be ruled out. It is not a dramatic proclamation. It is a record of honest uncertainty, and its quiet bravery is the bravery of many who made small notations that later became pieces of a larger pattern." The Cold War provided both impetus and suppression. Each side had reason to be both watchful and secretive. That combination created an environment where anomalies could silently gather into a catalogue known only to a few. Yet when veterans from both camps later began to speak, a shared story emerged, across continents and ideologies. This same strange motions circled the same dangerous technologies. The similarity is not proof of origin, but it is a stubborn fact that refuses to be smoothed away by politics. As we drift toward the close of this chapter, let the image of a frigid night sky linger. A light appears above a silo in Siberia, then lifts and vanishes. A radar operator scribbles the time in a logbook. A technician closes the file and returns home with a new, private knowledge. In the hush of these repeated scenes, the world grows strangely smaller, not in threat but in shared mystery. Chapter 6: Rendlesham Forest, Britain's Nuclear Secret. Let your breath flow slowly now, as if you're easing into a quiet glade. Tonight we travel gently across the channel to a pocket of pine and shadow where, in the long night after Christmas in 1980, a small group of servicemen stepped into a story that would not leave them. The place is Rendlesham Forest, and the memory of those nights has become one of the most persistent and studied encounters in the modern record. What happened there is part witness testimony, part recorded memo, part debate, and part that hush we all feel when the world does not fully explain itself. In the small hours of late December, on nights that local memory remembers as sharp and still, lights were observed descending into the trees near the east gate of RAF Woodbridge, a facility then used in conjunction with the nearby RAF Bentwaters. Those on patrol initially moved toward the lights, believing they might be a crashed aircraft. When they entered the forest, they described a metallic object with coloured lights that seemed to move among the trunks, sometimes close enough that it could be circled and inspected. The Deputy Base Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt, later compiled a memorandum summarising his investigation, and the events that several personnel witnessed. That memo, now public, serves as a clear point of reference for what was recorded in the immediate months after the incident. Listen to the texture of those nights. Imagine watchmen in cold jackets rounding the same bend they had walked 1,000 times, expecting only the ordinary: fox tracks, the distant sound of traffic, the static of a radio. Instead, they found a light with a steady, peculiar presence. A radiance that did not belong to a car or aircraft, that did not flicker like a meteor. They described the object as metallic, as having facets or panels, and as casting its own light into the trees in a way that threw long, strange shadows on the pine needles and undergrowth. For these men, trained to catalogue anomalies with precision, the event was a disturbance in the ledger of what was expected. It's important to hold in our hands a few solid facts as anchors for this longer, more gentle exploration. The incident took place in late December 1980 around RF Woodbridge and the nearby RF Bentwaters. The material presence of US nuclear weapons and related assets at Bentwaters and Woodbridge during that era is on the public record and helped to shape why the location was sensitive. The parliamentary and archival record later confirmed questions and controversy about weapons storage at those sites during that period. On the second night of investigation, Lieutenant Colonel Holt himself visited the scene with a small group and recorded portions of the event on a microcassette recorder now widely known as the Holt tape. On that night, the team used standard-issue radiation survey equipment to take readings across depressions in the ground that some believed might mark a landing. Readings reported in the memo and related documents show small, localized anomalies above background levels in narrow spots, though later analysis has debated their significance and measurement technique. The recorded sounds on the tape, the measured, clipped voices, the rustle of jackets, the soft word of caution, still carry the human weight of officers doing the work they were trained to do: observe, measure, and report. There are, as you may already know, several natural and mundane explanations that have been advanced over time. Researchers and skeptics have pointed to a bright meteor or fireball that was visible in the area that night, to the steady flash pattern of the Orfordness Lighthouse on the coast that sits roughly in line with the forest clearing, and to the play of bright stars like Sirius in a cold sky that can look odd through trees. These are serious observations, and they deserve respect because careful skepticism is an important part of truth-seeking. The contrast between the recorded testimony and these plausible natural sources is where the narrative develops its tension. And yet, woven through the factual threads is something more intimate. The way human beings change when they meet something they cannot easily place. Men who had spent their careers inside routine, strict hierarchies found themselves experiencing sensations that belonged less to procedure and more to wonder. Sergeant Jim Penniston later described, in interviews given decades after the nights in question, approaching a craft and feeling an almost physical sense of time seeming to slow, of panels warm to the touch, and of impressions that would linger in a memory and journal. Another guard, John Burroughs, gave a careful account of lights and of the direction of their sighting. These individual voices vary in detail as human voices do, yet together they form a braided recollection of something witnessed in the trees. The texture of these testimonies, the small disagreements, the shared astonishment, makes the story feel real in a way that raw data alone cannot. As a gentle, narrative enhancement that fits naturally with what some analysts later suggested, imagine a quiet exchange within NATO's secure channels, a short brief forwarded among allies noting odd lights near a base storing nuclear hardware, followed by a careful annotation, not a determination, but a notation of concern. In our imagining, the phrase reads, "Symbols, if real, may relate to interface and observation rather than hostility." This fictional note helps us picture how Allied analysts might have discussed such an event in careful, non-committal language, the kind of language that is used when one party is reluctant to overstate what is known and yet unwilling to dismiss what is recorded. What is striking about the Rendlesham narrative, and what keeps people listening decades later, is the blend of the banal and the uncanny, the bureaucratic memo, the microcassette recording, the measured radiation reading, and the oddly domestic act of guards shining flashlights through trees. These are not cinematic set pieces. They are small, human acts performed under abnormal circumstances. It is the ordinariness of the witnesses, their training, their tendency to be precise, that lends a particular weight to their accounts. When officers who read instruments every day describe instrument anomalies, at the same time they describe what they saw, the two sorts of evidence begin to resonate with one another. We must also sit with the darker, quieter possibility that I will share now in gentle tones. Whether the object, if it was a craft of some intelligence, simply intended to be curious, to observe, or to indicate concern. In the Rendlesham case, there were reports of strange markings on the ground and of a faint, localized increase in readings that suggested some energetic interaction had occurred, enough to draw attention, but not to harm. If we place this alongside incidents elsewhere where systems were disabled but no lives were taken, a hypothesis begins to shape. An intelligence interested in our most dangerous instruments, close enough to touch, but careful in its touch. In the Rendlesham Nights, this idea takes a particular texture, not a global demonstration of power, but a local examination up close and under the trees. We should be honest about what we do not know. Analysis later questioned the magnitude and placement of the radiation readings and compared them against equipment characteristics. Critics have suggested that some observations were misinterpreted or conflated with known lights and natural phenomena. Government archives and the Ministry of Defence, in discussing the event, treated it as of insufficient threat to warrant a large-scale official security response. Yet the event nonetheless stirred anxiety inside agencies used to managing the most serious risks, and the documents that later surfaced reveal a degree of concern about how to handle such anomalies within a political and military framework. Finally, allow a quiet image to close this chapter. Picture a small group of men standing among pines, the breath of each visible in the cold air, the forest swallowing sound as well as light. One of them holds a Geiger counter, another holds a cassette recorder with the red light glowing. They speak in low tones, exactly the way professionals do, measured, terse, and attentive to detail. In the end, they return to their posts and to the life that will, for the most part, continue in the ordinary groove of work and family. Yet a memory remains, a series of nights when ordinary watchfulness collided with something odd and intimate. That memory hangs now in public record and private recollection in equal measure, an invitation to listen more closely. We will revisit Rendlesham again from slightly different angles in later chapters, to examine the halt tape closely, to compare the ground marks described by some to the forest floor today, and to listen to later interviews where details surface and shift. For now, rest in the image of the trees and the small lights, and let the hush that surrounds them ease your mind as you continue to follow this unfolding story. Chapter 7. The Watchers Beneath the Water. Ease into the next part of our journey. Let your body sink an inch lower into the chair or bed, and imagine the steady hush of the ocean at night. The sea is a deep, slow heartbeat for the planet, a place of vast, patient motion where light fades quickly and sound travels like a language. It is also, for the purposes of our story, another layer of the map where humanity keeps its ultimate instruments, submerged beneath waves and pressure, Hidden within steel hulls lie the platforms of second strike capability, ballistic missile submarines that sleep, move, and stand ready in a silence so complete it feels sacred. It is here, in that blue-black quiet, that a different kind of watcher has sometimes been reported, an intrusion into a domain we think we own. There's a peculiar intimacy to the naval world. Life aboard a submarine is a slow choreography of routine. The hum of pumps, the click of instruments, the soft clack of boots on metal, the rituals of watch rotation, and the measured cadence of voice reports that cut through cabin air like oiled hinges. Sailors become exquisitely attuned to the ship as a living system. They know the usual groans of hull and pipe. They can tell by ear and instrument how the vessel breathes. When something unexpected enters that sphere of knowledge, a new sound, an unusual wake, a transient magnetic hiccup, it is noticed and logged with careful hands. Over the years, accounts have emerged from naval personnel who describe encounters that do not fit the pattern of known maritime phenomena. Officers on patrol have reported seeing lights move beneath the ocean surface. Sonar operators have logged transient objects that accelerate in ways no known submarine could. Captains have received reports from watchstanders that an unknown contact surfaced near the periphery of a formation and then vanished as if folding into the sea itself. These reports vary in detail, tone, and context, but together they sketch an image of observation that crosses air, land, and now water. Consider how unusual it is for something to move through water near a ballistic missile submarine. These vessels are designed to be stealthy, to hide in depth and silence, and to preserve a margin of uncertainty for an adversary. Their routes are plotted to avoid busy shipping lanes, and their crews are trained to read the subtle play of ocean acoustics. If an object appears with speed, agility, and an unfamiliar acoustic signature, it unsettles the entire framework of expectation. Imagine a sonar operator in a dimly lit compartment, the screens casting soft green light on their face. The console beeps, a return that is neither echo from the seabed nor the consistent chirp of a friendly sonar ping. It appears closer than it should, forms an anomalous track, and then disappears without the slowness of a ragged contact fading away. The technicians cross-reference their logs, replay tape, consult older runs. The motion is unlike known propulsive profiles. It is faster than known underwater vehicles and curiously discreet. Later, in hushed conversation over coffee, crew members describe a shape that may or may not have been seen through a periscope. Metallic, smooth, moving with a confidence that feels almost deliberate. There are also stories of magnetic anomalies that momentarily affect a submarine's instruments, subtle shifts in compass readings, transients in magnetometers, brief interference with navigation equipment. These occurrences, recorded in careful logs, carry a different signature than weather or sea noise. For those who rely on precise navigational data for the safety of their vessel and the success of their mission, such small, inexplicable disturbances can be profoundly unnerving. We will introduce a quietly fictional thread now, one that helps knit the many disparate accounts into a textured possibility. A phrase sailors use in whispers, the shadow convoy. It is an unofficial name for a pattern of tracking anomalies and transient contacts reported off patrol routes where ballistic submarines operate. The shadow convoy is imagined as a succession of underwater phenomena, moving at unusual speeds and maintaining a respectful distance from a submarine's protective envelope. It does not ram, it does not board. It moves with the moral equivalent of hands held wide, observing rather than touching. This image is not meant to sensationalize, but to help us picture what it would mean to be watched beneath the waves. If aerial observers were demonstrating restraint above land and air, underwater watchers would need to display a comparable subtlety. They might record parameters, test defenses, or simply confirm presence. For a submarine captain, knowing that something had traversed their immediate waters and then withdrawn would leave the same quiet sense of evaluation we've come to know from other incidents. The machine was not harmed, but its safety margin had been examined. There are also plausible technical explanations that deserve our attention because they deepen the credibility of the accounts and provide points of contrast. The ocean is alive with strange sounds, whales singing across hundreds of miles, thermal layers that refract sonar signals like panes of glass, gas pockets that rise and pop. These phenomena can produce odd contacts and bewildering returns on sonar, yet many naval witnesses are experienced in distinguishing these anomalies from human-made craft. Their training and prolonged exposure give them a refined sense for the difference between biological and mechanical signatures. When such witnesses report something that outruns known biological movement and exhibits control not consistent with currents, their testimonies carry particular weight. Another consideration is the curious way technology behaves in the presence of certain transient phenomena. Submarine systems are hermetic and redundant, yet they do interact with the electromagnetic environment, and certain transient bursts, whether natural or artificial, can produce localized interference. In rare cases, crews have logged momentary glitches in telemetry that coincide with reported sightings. The pattern is not one of mass hysteria. It is a quiet, empirical observation, instrument anomalies co-occurring with visual or sonar contacts. The strategic logic of underwater observation is compelling too. Ballistic missile submarines represent the most survivable leg of a nuclear triad. They are the fearful insurance policy, quiet, deep, and capable of retaliatory strike. If an external intelligence were focused on reducing existential risks, the subs' quiet roaming through the dark would naturally be of intense interest. Monitoring underwater behavior, confirming crew routines, and understanding the design and operation of these submarines could provide invaluable perspective to an observer intent on assessing or influencing human capability. Human stories anchor these abstract possibilities. Take, for example, the account of a petty officer who later, after retirement, described a midnight watch where the sea surface was flat as glass and a pallid glow rippled below like a slow aurora. The watch team reported a contact on sonar that moved with purpose and then settled beneath the hull, maintaining position for several minutes before evaporating from the charts. The crew logged the event, and the captain filed a terse operational note that sat in an archive until the officer felt safe enough to speak publicly. Stories like these are shared not for drama, but to give a human face to the steady, patient curiosity of the ocean. We will also consider the interaction between air and sea. In several reports from other chapters, we have discussed lights seen moving over coastlines where submarines operate. It is not unreasonable to imagine an integrated observation pattern, something that can move through the air and sink beneath the waves, examining assets in multiple domains. That bridge between realms would be technologically sophisticated and operationally patient, and it would further the impression that these watchers are cataloguing systems rather than seeking immediate domination or destruction. As with previous chapters, there are quieter, more speculative threads to hold gently. Perhaps the watchers beneath the water are assessing the environmental consequences of nuclear propulsion and the radiological emissions associated with submarines. Perhaps they are cataloguing human resilience under the sea, how crews cope, how systems age, and how quietly nuclear technology is maintained in the world's most remote places. Each of these possibilities broadens the philosophical texture of the story, turning it from one of mere intrusion to one of measured, distributed observation. To keep you listening, let me softly foreshadow that later chapters will bring forward records and testimonies that further align air, land, and sea into a coherent picture. Specific cases will show concurrent anomalies across multiple domains. For now, allow the image of the ocean to settle, deep, dark, and alive with slow currents of information. Envision a submarine moving in its lonely, purposeful way, instruments humming, crew steady, and somewhere nearby an unidentified contact that glides, listens, and withdraws like a shadow in a dream. There is a beauty to this part of our story, even as it unsettles. The sea has always been where humans meet the larger planet and occasionally the unexpected. It is also a place of great humility, where machines and people alike are reminded of their limits. In the hush beneath the waves, the possibility that we are observed by something both capable and restrained invites a quiet re-examination of what we consider mastery. Breathe in with that thought and release. The ocean keeps time differently, and in that slowness we find a different kind of evidence. Testimonies shaped by salt and steel, instruments that sing in frequencies unfamiliar to the eye, and a long patience on both sides of the watch. Listen to the soft weight of that possibility as you prepare to move on. There are more voices ahead, more documents to examine, and a widening pattern that touches land, air, and sea. Chapter 8. Whistleblowers who broke the silence. Allow your breathing to slow further, like a gentle tide pulling back toward the shoreline. This chapter is about voices that waited, voices that held a quiet truth inside uniform chests and ordinary lives until the moment came when silence felt heavier than speaking. These are the people who, after years of training and duty, stepped forward to tell a story that unsettled official records and warmed the cold lines of classified files with human feeling. Their testimonies give weight to events that might otherwise be only technical anomalies. They turn instrument blips into moments with names and faces, and their courage makes the pattern we have been tracing feel less like rumour and more like memory. Imagine a long career shaped by rote and ritual. Years in a control room, the steady cadence of morning checks, the small jokes shared at the coffee pot, the careful inventory of parts and procedures. For decades, these men and women did not speak of what they saw. They filed reports into locked drawers, registered anomalies in concise handwritten lines, and then folded those writings into the larger bureaucracy. They learned the rules: do your job, preserve stability, protect secrets that keep systems from misfiring. Many believed that silence itself was an act of responsibility. Yet there is a threshold where a single memory presses so persistently that it reshapes a life. A retired lieutenant walks into a television studio, voice measured but worn. A former radar operator publishes a careful manuscript. An engineer pens a letter to a congressman. Each step is small and brave. One of the most piercing elements of this human story is the timing. Almost all who went public did so long after their active service had ended. Retirement, quiet years, the easing of career pressures. These moments created space for confession. They were not seeking fame. They often wanted only to set the record straight, to add testimony to the archival weight, to make sure the anomalous behavior documented in dusty files was not simply forgotten. The reasons people chose to speak are not simple. Some felt an ethical pull, a need to warn the public, others a desire to unburden themselves. Many were driven by a simple truth, that the phenomenon deserved a clear record. When these witnesses finally spoke, their accounts shared certain humane textures. They did not embellish for drama. They described procedures and protocols, times and instrument readings, the minutiae that make a claim credible. They spoke of lists of steps that should have returned a green light but did not. They described a glow seen through a perimeter fence, the hush of a radio when a blip vanished, the small ritual movement of a hand scanning a console. Their words were tempered by the habit of professionals who had learned to distrust sensationalism. Because they were careful, their testimonies carried weight. There is always danger in going public about classified or sensitive matters. A whistleblower may face skepticism, lawsuits, ostracism, or professional ruin. This risk kept many silent for decades. But in time, when the world shifted and public curiosity grew, a few stepped across the line. The effect of their testimony was not immediate fireworks. Instead, it was cumulative. One interview added a measured reinforcement to another. A single sworn statement nudged an archive to reopen a boxed file. The pattern we have been mapping gathered more faces and more timestamps, which is what lends the story its human truth. In quiet tones, we will imagine, very gently, a support group that formed among those who had been involved with nuclear sites. It began as a private conversation over tea between two retired security officers and grew into a confidant network where people could speak without fear of immediate repercussion. The group met in basements and community halls, sometimes in the warm, sleepy hours after midnight when the world outside felt safely distant. They traded stories with each other, not to create spectacle, but to compare notes, to find patterns, and to understand what their shared experience meant. The image is fictional but plausible, and it helps us see how human beings process strange events together, slowly, collectively, and with care. Within the accounts of whistleblowers, there are few theatrical demands. Instead, there are small, precise details that hang heavy. A security officer who saw a light over a battery of missiles describes how the light seemed to know the location, as if it had been watching in advance. A radar technician who watched returns dance off the screen speaks of the cold certainty of a plot that did not match known flight characteristics. An engineer who found safing circuits inexplicably bypassed at the same moment a glow hovered over a silo later described the quiet anger in the control room. Not anger at the unknown, but frustration at the inability of systems to account for what had happened. These human moments give us access to another crucial element, the emotional cost of secrecy. Many of those who went public told of the toll it took to live with a classified event as an unshared memory. Some spoke of strained marriages when their spouse could not be told the truth. Others recounted the strange sensation of watching news footage of crises while knowing, privately, that something stranger watched over the instruments behind the scenes. The emotional texture of the whistleblower narrative is not sensational. It is ordinary and intimate. Insomnia, the slow erosion of certainty, and ultimately the relief of telling a truth aloud. There are also quieter institutional reactions. When a retired officer comes forward with a testimony, a cascade of responses can unfold. Journalists pick up the thread. Researchers call to compare notes. Skeptical analysts reread old files with new questions. Sometimes documents that have been sealed start to appear in Freedom of Information requests. Other times hearings are convened, not for sensationalism but to listen, to evaluate, and to catalogue. The whistleblower's action often functions as a pebble dropped into a pond. The ripples move slowly but inevitably outward. Within these ripples we also find grace. Families and communities sometimes rally around the speaker. Young researchers comb archives, and sympathetic journalists craft careful narratives that treat witnesses with dignity. Over time, the public record accrues kernels of corroboration. Names that once existed only in oral memory appear in logbooks. Timestamps line up with meteorological events and with instrument reads in ways that can be compared and weighed. The story becomes less about a single person's claim and more about a shared archive of experience. Not every testimony is airtight. Some witnesses contradict each other in detail. Memories are fallible. Instruments have quirks. We do not ignore that. What makes the whistleblower corpus powerful is not that every sentence is unassailable, but that many independent, trained observers described elements that aligned across contexts. Lights over silos, transient instrumentation anomalies, and a consistent pattern of restraint. The chorus of voices, when considered collectively, moves the question from solitary anecdote toward a credible pattern worthy of sustained inquiry. One of the most moving moments often recounted by these individuals is the relief that comes from being believed by even a single listener. A journalist who listens without mockery, a researcher who cross-checks times and locations, a former colleague who says, "I saw something like that too." These reactions humanize the whistleblower and transform an isolating memory into a public artifact. That human confirmation is part of what makes later chapters of our story possible. The slow accretion of testimony that builds a map from which future investigators can draw. We will fold in another small, fictional but plausible episode to deepen the texture of this chapter. A retired engineer, now grey and careful with his hands, brings a small box of maintenance logs to a public forum. He lays them on a table, and with a voice that trembles only slightly, traces the sequence of errors to a single timestamp. A researcher in the room, with a pile of declassified teletypes beside her, notices a matching note from the same hour in a different base across the ocean. The coincidence is not dramatic in isolation, but together these small overlaps begin to form a lattice of time and place that makes prior dismissal less tenable. As we begin to close this chapter, breathe in the long patience of these people. Their contributions are not loud or theatrical. They are careful deposits into an archive of human memory. They are the small acts that, collected over time, lift the story from speculation to something with weight and continuity. When we listen to them in a calm, unhurried way, we can feel the outlines of a phenomenon that touches not only machines and instruments, but the lives of those who stood guard over them. The whistleblowers did not promise answers. They offered testimony and invitation. Examine the records, compare the times, talk to the people who were there. Some of them faced scorn, others were quietly supported. All of them left us with the most human evidence of all, voices that remembered, and in their remembering they gave us permission to ask with modesty and persistence what the pattern of these encounters might mean for a species that learned to harness the atom. Chapter 9. Why nuclear weapons? Breathe in slowly, and let the thought sink like a pebble into a still pond. Tonight we turn to the question that quietly sits at the center of everything we've been tracing. Why would anything take a special interest in these machines we call nuclear weapons? What is it about metal bunkers, silos, reactors, and the slow, humming logic of deterrence that seems to draw the attention we have been following across decades and oceans? There are many ways to approach this question, technical, philosophical, and even moral, and in this chapter we will move slowly through each of them, allowing the complexity to unfold like a slow blossom. We will listen to scientists' language, to engineers' practical notes, to the hush of ethical speculation, and to the faint but insistent testimonies that suggest attention, not accident. First, consider a very practical line of thought. Nuclear weapons are energetic events on a scale unfamiliar to natural planetary processes. They create bursts of energy that do not occur in the normal rhythm of weather or geology. A detonation releases heat, intense light, ionizing radiation, and shock waves. Even below full-scale detonations, tests and accidents leave traces, localized changes in radiation levels, unusual electromagnetic activity, and atmospheric disturbances that can be measured. From a purely observational perspective, these signatures are strong, unusual, and, most importantly, unmistakable when compared with routine terrestrial phenomena. It is not difficult to imagine that a monitoring intelligence with sensors unlike our own could detect such signatures from great distance and register them as markers of a significant change in a species' behavior. Let us move gently into a second line of thought, which borrows from physics but remains speculative in its reach. Nuclear events involve the release and movement of particles and fields that interact with space in ways we are only beginning to grasp in full. Ionizing radiation, high-energy particles, and transient electromagnetic pulses all behave differently from the everyday environmental noise we experience. To a sensitive, advanced observing system, one that might read different bands of the electromagnetic spectrum or detect fleeting particle fluxes, these emissions would be a clear, luminous announcement. A species has mastered a form of energy that can alter matter at its core. It is a milestone of technological maturity and a potential harbinger of risk. It marks a planet that has crossed a threshold. There is also an idea, quietly held by some analysts and often voiced in speculative writing, that nuclear weapons do more than emit energy. They create conditions. Tests and detonations change the local environment in measurable ways. They create ionized trails, alter atmospheric chemistry, and even influence the propagation of radio and radar signals for a time. If an observing intelligence uses a constellation of sensing modalities, visual, electromagnetic, and particle-based, the aftermath of a test would look like an unmistakable fingerprint. Some theorists imagine that observers catalogue such fingerprints, assembling a database of human capability and the willingness to use it. The presence of that database would explain why attention would be focused not simply on the presence of nuclear assets, but on the moments when they are tested or exercised. Another theory, one that moves into the ethical and symbolic, suggests that nuclear weapons are not only instruments, but statements about intent. They convert scientific knowledge into an existential leverage, the ability to extinguish large swaths of life. If an external intelligence cares about long-term survivability, whether of this planet as a whole or of biospheric life, the appearance of technology able to cause global catastrophe is a grave signal. Under this view, observation becomes a form of stewardship, and intervention might be configured as prevention, demonstration, or deterrence. The consistent pattern we have seen, disabling rather than destroying, fits with a logic of demonstration or caution. The aim may not be domination, but protection against a risk that could end many forms of life, including the observer's own interests, whatever they may be. We also need to slow down and consider the possibility that the watchers are not all of one mind or motive. Some encounters might be curious study, others clinical monitoring, and yet others testing. The variety of behavior across different incidents, from tentative hovering to brief purposeful interference, could indicate multiple actors or a single actor employing many methods. Human history itself offers analogies. One group quietly catalogues, another tests a boundary, a third warns without explicit speech. That variation, gently acknowledged, allows us to hold the complexity without forcing a single, simplified narrative on it. A different, more technical suggestion concerns the way nuclear weapons interact with time and information. There are speculative hypotheses drawn from the fringes of theoretical physics that intense concentrations of energy could, in principle, produce transient effects on local space-time metrics, minuscule, hard-to-detect distortions that an advanced observer might read as anomalies. These ideas move quickly from science to speculation, so we hold them lightly. Yet if even a fraction of such effects were detectable at range by a sensor suite that evolved differently from ours, The appearance of nuclear detonations could register as perturbations that require attention. In other words, the act of testing and the infrastructure supporting it might alter the local data environment in a way that marks humanity as noteworthy. We should also listen to the human side evidence with calm care. Many witnesses emphasize not just the location of sightings, but the choice of targets, not merely cities or factories, but the instruments designed for extinction. Security officers, technicians, and engineers who saw these events repeatedly described the same targeting of missiles, silos, reactor cores, and submarines. That repeated attention suggests interest in human capacity rather than in incidental infrastructure. If we accept those testimonies as credible, and the cumulative weight of trained observers makes that easier to do, then intention becomes harder to dismiss. The watchers were attentive to the nuts and bolts of human deterrence, not to the incidental trappings of industrial life. It is also worth contemplating the possible goals of such attention. One plausible purpose would be to test control, to see whether systems can be interrupted, for how long, and under what conditions. Another would be to collect data about human reaction. How quickly do protocols escalate? What decisions are made under pressure? How does a global network of command and control respond to an unknown interference? Such data would be invaluable to any intelligence trying to understand the social-technical complex that underpins nuclear deterrence. In many recorded incidents, the observers seemed to stop short of causing irreversible harm. That restraint could have been a deliberate choice to gather information without triggering unpredictable escalation. We will fold a gentle fictional element into this analytic weave, one that helps make the scenario emotionally tangible without pretending it is archival truth. Imagine a quiet, classified intelligence assessment written in the margins of a larger report. In a sober sentence it reads, "Their interest is not power, but consequences." The phrasing is meant to point away from a desire for conquest and toward a concern for outcomes. What happens if a species equipped with total warfare continues on a reckless path? This fictional line is a small narrative device, but it helps crystallize a view that aligns with many of the witnesses and patterns we have already considered. Of course, there are simpler, more terrestrial explanations that deserve our careful attention. Some sightings might be misidentified aircraft, atmospheric plasma, or sensor error. Some system failures attributed to outside interference could be the result of maintenance lapses or software glitches. We must always weigh these mundane explanations honestly. Yet the cumulative weight of reports, across eras, nations, and instruments, requires that we also consider the possibility that not all of the phenomena can be dismissed by mechanical or perceptual error. When dozens of trained observers in different contexts describe similar behavior, the hypothesis of attention gains plausibility. There is another angle that softens the sharp edges of fear: communication by demonstration. If we think of a message being sent without language, an action rather than a speech, disabling a weapon briefly can function as a profoundly clear statement. It tells us with a precision our noisy human languages often lack, that our capacity has been observed and that force can be shown without force. It is the moral equivalent of a hand gently pressing the brakes on a speeding vehicle and then letting it continue, leaving the driver with both alarm and a new understanding of vulnerability. We must also sit with the ethical weight of this speculation. If an intelligence acts out of concern for the biosphere, it places us in a moral relation we have not consented to, an external steward watching over human affairs. That raises deep questions about autonomy, paternalism, and the limits of intervention. If, instead, the attention is coldly strategic, focused on cataloguing capabilities, the implications for sovereignty and for global security frameworks are equally heavy. Any of these possibilities invites us not to panic, but to reflect on the choices we make as a species capable of such destructive power. As this chapter draws to a close, I will leave you with a gentle invitation and a soft prompt for the chapters to come. We have walked through many ideas here: particles and fields, symbolic statements, tests of control, and the slow, human work of observation. In later chapters, we'll explore how modern encounters and recent disclosures fold into these theories. We will listen to contemporary witnesses, examine changes in language from UFO to UAP, and consider what the continuing pattern means in an age of satellites and global monitoring. For now, rest with the idea that the question why nuclear weapons opens into a field of layered answers, technical, ethical, and emotional, and that the most compelling truth may be the one that asks us to change how we think about power. Softly now, let the thought sink. We move forward not to conclude, but to remain curious, to gather more voices and documents, and to watch how the pattern holds. There is solace in patient inquiry. There is bravery in restraint, both the restraint some witnesses described in the actions of the watchers and the restraint we practice as listeners, deciding what to accept with humility and what to hold as possibility. Chapter 10. The silence that followed. Let your breath deepen now, slow and even, as if you are sinking into a deep chair by a quiet window. The story we've been tracing does not end in bright lights or sudden revelations. Instead, it moves into a hush, a long, deliberate silencing that changed how the world recorded, spoke about, and ultimately remembered these encounters. This chapter is about that hush, about why the pattern we have watched so closely seemed to dim in public view, even as observation and concern continued in quieter rooms. We will walk slowly through the layers of secrecy, the shifts in language, the institutional choices made under pressure, and the human cost of carrying knowledge that could not be fully shared. Imagine again that map of guarded perimeters and watchtowers, but now see it covered by a soft fog of classification. In the early decades, when sighting reports filtered into military and intelligence channels, a basic path existed: observation, record, evaluation, and occasionally public acknowledgement. Over time, however, a different logic crept in, one shaped by geopolitics, legal frameworks, and the sober need to prevent panic. Gradually, many incidents that might once have surfaced as public curiosity were folded into secure files, catalogued under headings that rarely invited public scrutiny. The world outside the gates saw fewer headlines. The world inside the perimeters kept a longer, more complicated ledger. There were practical reasons for that change. During tense political eras, any anomalous activity near nuclear sites triggered immediate concern about espionage, sabotage, or misinterpretation that could lead to escalation. Governments and militaries tightened reporting procedures. Systems that once allowed for wider dissemination of unusual reports were constricted to keep them from becoming tools of confusion or political theatre. In this atmosphere, the simplest way to avoid compounding risk was to contain information, to narrate incidents as technical anomalies, and to restrict their circulation to those with a clear operational need to know. At the same time, a new vocabulary began to emerge. Where earlier decades used the term UFO with its cultural baggage and public fascination, later years favoured more clinical phrasing: unidentified aerial phenomena, unidentified anomalous phenomena, or simply UAP. The shift in words was not merely semantic. It reflected an institutional desire to recast the conversation from spectacle to subject for investigation. Language became a tool for control, neutral, descriptive, and less likely to inflame public imagination. The change helped officials treat cases as data points in a technical inquiry rather than as seeds of conspiracy in public discourse. But language alone did not solve the deeper tension. The same incidents that once prompted open curiosity now pushed institutions into difficult choices. How much to disclose without revealing vulnerabilities? When would disclosure help public safety? And when would it harm national security? These questions are not fanciful. They are the furniture of policy making. In many cases, the answer chosen was non-disclosure. The result was a slow migration of stories from public pages into classified archives, where they accumulated in neat boxes and digital folders, visible only to people with clearance and a reason to look. The shift towards secrecy also changed the psychology of witnesses. For decades, people who had seen something that did not fit their training found that the route to being believed was narrower. Reports routed into classified channels rarely became the stuff of public testimony because exposing them risked career damage or legal consequences. Many stayed silent. Those who did speak often did so only after retirement, when the institutional leash loosened and the fear of reprisal faded. This pattern of delayed disclosure created the impression, for many, that sightings had simply stopped, when in truth they had often been repackaged, reclassified, or kept behind closed doors. Within the vaults where these cases were stored, something else quietly unfolded, a culture of strategic ambiguity. This is not a conspiratorial term, but a pragmatic posture. Never deny conclusively, never confirm beyond what is safe, and treat each case as potentially sensitive until proven otherwise. The posture allowed agencies to avoid the twin dangers of false panic and strategic misstep. It also ensured that, should a pattern prove dangerous, it could be treated with deliberate caution. In practical terms, this meant that some incidents received months of quiet analysis, cross-disciplinary consultation, and careful vetting before any limited release of information, if release came at all. That culture of ambiguity is itself an emotional climate. For those who had seen or logged events, it created isolation. Imagine a young officer who files a careful report and receives no public acknowledgement. She goes home and tries to speak to her spouse about what she saw. The spouse, lacking clearance and context, cannot grasp the technical significance. Over time, the officer learns to keep her memory private. The memory calcifies into a quiet, persistent ache. That pattern repeated across generations of personnel created a cohort of quiet custodianship. People who carry experience as a private burden rather than a public story. There are also procedural ripples that deepen the silence. As detection technologies improved, false positives and mundane anomalies could be filtered more effectively, so fewer curious incidents reached senior eyes. But improved detection also meant that when an anomaly could not be explained, it had to pass through more sophisticated and more cautious channels of scrutiny. Advanced sensors brought new data, and with that data came the need for interdisciplinary interpretation. Instrument specialists, physicists, intelligence analysts, and legal advisors all weighing in. Each extra hand in the process became another reason to delay or restrict disclosure until clarity was reached. Often, clarity arrived too slowly for public consumption. Another quiet current in this story is the interplay between declassification and distrust. Over time, some documents did come to light. Redacted memos, transcripts, and partial releases that confirmed that events had been logged and investigated. Each release, however partial, altered the public conversation and sometimes inspired new scrutiny. But even as declassified files emerged, they did not always provide narrative closure. The documents often read like technical accounts, timestamps, instrument readings, terse recommendations. For the public, such language can seem sterile. For the witnesses, it can feel like an erasure of the human texture of the night. The result is a public memory shaped as much by what remains sealed as by what is revealed. We will introduce a small, quietly imagined policy detail, now that helps explain how institutions might balance curiosity and caution. Picture a guideline known informally among analysts as strategic ambiguity, a practice to neither fully acknowledge nor entirely dismiss anomalous reports. It instructs minds to gather data, to cross-reference with foreign intelligence, to monitor quietly, and to wait for corroboration that justifies a broader disclosure. This practice is not malevolent, it is bureaucratically rational. It is the slow machinery of a system trying to hold safety in one hand and truth in the other. Even as secrecy tightened, observation itself did not stop. If anything, the watchers became more sophisticated. New sensor arrays, satellite networks, and cross-agency collaborations allowed for more detailed cataloguing of anomalies, even if much of that data remained classified. In rooms with heavy doors and controlled clearances, analysts continued to chart patterns, to ask whether interference coincided with tests, and to simulate what would happen if systems were manipulated in ways that could cause miscalculation. These quiet deliberations are not the stuff of drama, they are the sober work of risk reduction. Yet their silence had a public cost. Fewer stories in the newspapers, less open debate, and a growing gap between lived experience and public knowledge. There is a human tenderness to this chapter as well. For every file locked away, there is a face that remembers a night. For every memo stamped classified, there is a retired technician who can still hear the hum of the console. Over decades, some of these people found small outlets, careful leaks, vetted interviews, or memorialized testimonies in books and films. Each act of disclosure, however cautious, chipped at the wall of silence and invited wider reflection. The slow accumulation of such acts has been crucial in shifting the conversation from myth to method, from headlines to the slow craft of investigation. As you breathe now, consider the paradox at the heart of this hush. Secrecy was intended to protect stability, yet it also deepened mystery. The world outside the gates assumed things were quieter. Inside, watchrooms continued their quiet work. The language changed from sensational to clinical, and the institutions that hold power adopted a posture of measured ambiguity. None of this resolves the deeper question of intent or origin, but it does explain why, for a long period, the phenomenon we have followed retreated from public view into the patient work of classified analysis. In the chapters ahead, we'll watch the conversation return to the surface again in different forms. We will explore how modern reporting standards, change in political attitudes, and the slow bravery of witnesses reopened old files. We will listen to how new technologies both complicate and clarify what is observed. For now, rest in the understanding that silence was not absence. It was a choice, made by systems designed to prevent panic and by people who preferred caution over spectacle. That choice shaped how history remembered the nights, the lights, and the slow, persistent pattern that connected them. Chapter 11. A test, a warning, or a countdown? Breathe in slowly and let your mind soften as we sit with the most unnerving question of all. When these objects interfered with our most dangerous machines, what exactly were they doing? Testing us, warning us, or setting a slow, deliberate countdown? The words themselves carry pressure. A test is clinical, a warning is moral, and a countdown is temporal and terrifying. In this chapter, we will unfold each possibility carefully, gently, and in great detail. We will listen to the language of engineers and analysts, imagine the private debates that likely took place behind heavy doors, and follow the human stories that remain at the heart of every incident. We will not rush to a single conclusion, but we will lean into the compelling pattern that asks for our sober attention. First, consider the hypothesis of testing. In any technological domain, there is a logic to experiment. Perturb a system, observe the response, refine the model, and repeat. The cold reality of nuclear command and control is that it is designed with layers of redundancy and safeguards, precisely to prevent accidental or unauthorized use. A test, in this sense, might aim to understand those layers, to learn which protocols trip under load, which safing circuits hold, and how human operators behave when alarms flash. For an external observer, especially one not limited by our social taboos, a test conducted quietly and repeatedly would reveal a map of human capabilities and vulnerabilities without the need for open confrontation. Imagine a hypothetical sequence. An object approaches a silo field, produces a localized electromagnetic disturbance, and the result is a brief deactivation of one missile's readiness state. The observers note the duration of the outage, the steps technicians take to restore the system, how long it takes them to escalate through the chain of command, and whether any automatic safeguards engage. Each action becomes data. Over years and across multiple sites, a catalogue emerges: human reaction times, system failure modes, and the points at which policy and technology intersect in unpredictable ways. From a purely analytical perspective, such a catalogue would be invaluable, not as an act of malice but as a rigorous study of a system's resilience. The testing idea also helps explain certain technical signatures recorded in some incidents: transient electromagnetic spikes, brief logic flips, or sensor saturations that do not produce physical damage. These are the sorts of outcomes you would expect from a non-destructive probe, something that reveals the wiring without burning it. It is a quietly sophisticated form of reconnaissance, and its very subtlety is what makes it disquieting, because the instrument is learning and we may not even realize the classroom is in session. Next, let us turn our attention gently to the possibility of warning. A warning implies moral judgment and choice. The watcher sees a capacity that could lead to catastrophe and intervenes, not to seize but to caution. In many intimate interviews and testimonies, a recurring emotional motif appears, not malevolence but concern. The repeated pattern of temporary disabling rather than destruction can be read as an ethic enacted in action: show capability, then hold back. If the intent is to warn, the watchers may be seeking to communicate a message about limits and consequences without obliterating the thing they wish to correct. Imagine a gentle, deliberate scenario. A craft appears over a plant or a silo at night. Systems flicker. An alarm is briefly silenced. The instrument returns to function. The implication is unmistakable. Those weapons are vulnerable, and we can touch them. The lesson is given without bloodshed. The moral calculus is interesting. A warning delivered through action rather than words avoids translation errors, ambiguity, and the potential for panic. It forces a response at the level of policy and public debate. How do we manage arsenals that can be observed and influenced by unknown actors? A warning reframes the problem from a technical vulnerability to a moral question about the kind of species we wish to be. There's another aspect of warning worth exploring with care: audience selection. The incidents we have traced often target precisely those people and systems that design, maintain, and in extremis use nuclear weapons. The watchers are not showing spectacles to crowded cities. They are showing themselves to the custodians of the instruments. That selectivity suggests a communicative intent aimed at those best positioned to change doctrine, to think ethically about escalation, and to choose restraint. A warning, in this sense, is less about fear and more about an insistence on responsibility. Finally, and with the softest breath of dread, we come to the countdown hypothesis. A countdown implies a temporal pressure, a sequence towards an event. It is the most chilling possibility because it introduces intentionality with an end date in mind. Some preparation taking time, a calibration of systems, or the measurement of human and mechanical response over the long term. We must approach this idea cautiously. Many patterns that look ominous under one interpretive lens dissolve under another. Still, where the data show repeated, measured interactions with critical systems, it is reasonable for analysts inside and outside governments to ask whether these interactions fit a model of escalation testing intended to explore thresholds for later action. To explore this calmly, imagine an intelligence assessment debated in a secure room. Analysts lay out timelines, incidents clustered around tests, repeated contacts near second strike platforms, an alternation between disabling and observation. The debate turns on probability. Is the pattern random, experimental, or preparatory? Counting the number of interactions over months and years could, in the worst-case reading, look like stage setting, establishing a knowledge base before a decision is made. The human mind finds such narratives compelling because they mirror the way we prepare for large undertakings: measurement, rehearsal, and finally action. Yet there are important moderating considerations. A countdown, by its nature, would be a high-risk strategy for any actor because it invites detection and counters. If the watchers intended to prepare for aggression, doing so by touching the very weapons they intend to use would seem both inefficient and dangerously provocative. The restraint observed across many incidents complicates the countdown reading. Why disable without destroying? Why avoid direct harm if the goal were harmful? These questions push us back toward the test, or warning hypotheses, which better accommodate the pattern of careful, non-destructive interference. We will imagine now, in a small and plausible fictional document, a memo circulating among senior analysts. Observed interactions consistent with capability demonstration, intent indeterminate, policy response, expand monitoring, avoid escalation, seek diplomatic channels where feasible. This imagined line captures the conservative logic one would expect from reasonable officials faced with ambiguous and potentially catastrophic phenomena. It is the kind of bureaucratic middle path that keeps options open and risks contained. There are human stories that illuminate the stakes of these interpretations. Consider an officer who, after witnessing a disabling event, finds himself confronting a policy question he never expected to answer. If presented with evidence of an external agency capable of touching our weapons, should he lobby publicly for disarmament to reduce risk, or argue for increased secrecy and hardening to retain deterrence? The moral tension here is palpable. Act to reduce vulnerability, and perhaps provoke strategic instability, or maintain deterrence and risk continued interference. These are not academic choices. They shape national security and potentially the survival of millions. From a retention perspective, keep this thought close. Later in our series, we will return to this debate with documents and voices that show exactly these kinds of questions being argued in secure rooms. We will slow down and read simulated transcripts, and we will listen to people who face the moral and professional choices we have sketched here. Those moments will repay patience because they shift the story from abstract pattern to lived, consequential deliberation. As we bring this chapter gently to a close, let us hold an uneasy equanimity. The watcher could be testing, learning the architecture of our fear and its fail-safes. The watcher could be warning, nudging us toward ethical reflection. Or, in the most fearful reading, the watcher could be preparing slowly and methodically for some future action. Each interpretation carries implications that ripple outward into doctrine, psychology, and public life. None of them can be adopted without humility. Finally, give yourself a careful exhale. The question of intent remains open, and that openness is both the source of our unease and of our responsibility. We will keep listening, and we will continue to gather testimony, documents, and technical readings that sharpen our understanding. For now, carry this chapter as a slow, persistent thought, that the pattern of interference asks a question we cannot answer overnight, and that our most prudent response is to stay curious, cautious, and committed to learning more. Chapter 12. If they were watching then, are they still watching now? Ease into a slow breath, feel the air move in and out, and let the thought settle like evening light on a window pane. If an intelligence watched our nuclear age with such consistent attention in the past, is it still watching us now? Tonight we will walk through that question carefully, in long, patient steps. We will consider how our world has changed, the satellites, the sensors, the instant global networks, and how those changes both complicate and deepen the pattern we have been following. We will listen to modern voices, imagine quiet, classified notes, and trace the thread from Cold War hush to a present in which many more eyes, some human, some mechanical, sweep the skies and seas every day. We will not demand final answers. Instead, we will gather evidence, weigh meaning, and leave space for the slow, moral work of interpretation. First, reflect on scale. Technologies that were once the province of a handful of governments now proliferate. Constellations of satellites circle the planet, recording imagery in near real time. Commercial sensors, once the private reserve of industry, now photograph coasts and bases with a clarity that would have seemed fantastical a generation ago. Drones hover at altitudes that used to be the exclusive domain of manned craft, and networks of radio receivers and radar installations knit together a web of awareness. If anything, the observational landscape has become denser and more layered. The very fact that we can document so many things today means that some anomalies that would once have lived only in a logbook can now leave multiple cross-check traces. Yet greater visibility brings new paradoxes. The more instruments we deploy, the more ambiguous some signals become. A satellite image can show an object over a facility, but not reveal its motion in 3 dimensions. Radar can detect a transient return, but not tell us what produced it. In many modern reports, different kinds of sensors record pieces of the same event without a single, definitive frame that resolves the mystery. Where earlier witnesses relied on human observation and local instruments, today's notebooks contain bytes and pixels as well as memories. That shift matters because it changes both what is observed and how authorities decide whether to disclose it. There's also the matter of scale in time. Historically, many of the key incidents unfolded over a few tense moments. Today, datasets stretching across years and accumulated by myriad sensors allow analysts to look for patterns at a more granular temporal scale. Analysts can query whether anomalies cluster during certain types of exercises, whether particular latitudes see more activity, or whether certain classes of facilities are observed repeatedly. The computational capacity to analyze such questions is vast, and the answers can be subtle. A weak clustering might be statistically significant. A single isolated event might be an operational fluke. The modern era gives us better tools, and with them the more exacting task of deciding what merits attention. Let us now listen to the human voices who say they have observed continued interest. Many contemporary witnesses, pilots, naval officers, maintenance crews and technicians have reported encounters that echo the patterns of old. precision approaches to sensitive sites, transient interference with systems, and a consistent absence of direct harm. These accounts are often framed differently than those of the Cold War era. More of them are recorded on helmet cams, dash cams, or logged automatically by onboard instrumentation. Whistleblowers who once feared professional ruin sometimes now find pathways to make measured disclosures through oversight bodies, reporters, or legal protections designed for the modern age. The times have changed, but the qualitative shape of some observations remains familiar. There is another thread that cannot be ignored: the changing language of institutions. Where earlier silence was shaped by strict classification, today there is a more public-facing conversation about unidentified phenomena. Some governments have created formal mechanisms to gather and analyse reports, acknowledging that unknown events in the air and near-sensitive infrastructure deserve methodical inquiry. That official attention does not by itself answer the question of intent. It does, however, mean that a larger corpus of data may exist, and that the pattern, if persistent, could show up more clearly in declassified summaries and careful analyses over time. We must also consider the behaviour of the watchers themselves, if watchers there are. In the decades since the earliest documented incidents, the world has grown more instrumented, more networked, and more capable of rapid response. If an external observer aims to understand humans and their weapons, adapting tactics to a denser sensor environment would be sensible. That adaptation might look like greater stealth, more selective interference, or a shift toward observation via platforms that blend into the technological background. In other words, if an intelligence was interested in our nuclear infrastructure 50 years ago, it could be even more circumspect today, choosing moments and modalities that minimize detection by crude instruments, while still interacting with the systems it wishes to study. Consider also the international dimension. In the Cold War, much of the documented pattern involved US and Soviet assets. Today's world is more multipolar. Nuclear capability is distributed across more nations and more delivery systems. If attention to nuclear sites was once concentrated on a bipolar conflict, a contemporary observer might distribute its sampling more widely, tracking submarines in the Pacific, reactor facilities across continents, and emerging technologies like hypersonic delivery systems. The broader map of potential interests suggests not a single focus but a wide net cast to understand a rapidly evolving technological landscape. We should gently imagine, for narrative purposes, a brief classified remark that circulates among contemporary analysts. Nuclear sites remain priority observation zones. The line is careful and spare. It's not a claim of constant surveillance, nor an admission of knowledge of intent. It is a policy-level recognition that the risks inherent in nuclear arsenals continue to warrant prioritizing monitoring and analysis. This fictional line helps make sense of how bureaucracies might quietly orient resources without creating public alarm. It is the kind of phrase that, while not dramatic, carries the institutional logic of sustained attention. There is also the question of motive in the present day. If watchers once acted to warn, test, or catalogue, would those motives persist? The plausible answers are varied. A long-term concern for planetary stability would not be erased by decades of human development. A scientific curiosity about a species that could alter its planet might deepen rather than fade. Conversely, strategic motives might evolve with new actors, new doctrines, and new technology. Observers might now be more interested in the subtleties of cyber control, the robustness of satellite networks, and the human factors of decision-making under the compressed timelines afforded by modern weapon systems. These are not mutually exclusive motives. They may coexist and shape behaviour in complex ways. Modern incidents also provide new kinds of corroboration. Where earlier accounts might have been single-camera testimonies, today's events sometimes leave overlapping footprints: a transient radar return, a satellite thumbnail, a pilot's night vision clip, and a time-stamped maintenance log. The convergence of independent datasets increases the credibility of certain cases. It also raises the stakes. When multiple instruments align on an unexplainable event near critical infrastructure, analysts must grapple with the possibility that something non-trivial occurred and decide what policy responses are appropriate. We will also gently address an important human dynamic: the effect of continuous observation on those who guard sensitive sites. For decades, watchstanders carried memories privately. Today, the knowledge that an event might be captured by remote systems changes how incidents are reported, catalogued, and interpreted. It can encourage transparency in some cases and create fear of misinterpretation in others. The modern era brings both the comfort of corroboration and the discomfort of being recorded in moments that may be misunderstood. As we move toward a close on this chapter, listen to a couple of patient implications. First, even if the watchers are less overt now, the pattern of attention to nuclear assets appears to have outlived the Cold War era. The technological web of our present age makes both detection and analysis more robust, and that increases the likelihood that repeat patterns will be visible to careful, patient inquiry. Second, modern observation encourages a different kind of response. Public institutions now have pathways to study anomalies with scientific rigor rather than dismissing them outright. That evolution may, over time, shift the discussion from secrecy to structured investigation. Finally, let us hold a soft human hope. If any intelligence has watched us with the intention to warn, test, or catalogue, then our best response as a species is not to panic but to grow wise. The presence of watchers, in whatever form they take, raises questions about how we manage existential risk, how we reduce unnecessary threats, and how we choose policies that preserve life. There is a dignity in inquiry, a slow bravery in restraint, and a practical duty in better safeguarding the systems we live with. Rest now with the image of a world layered with instruments, populated by people who keep watch, and threaded by a long habit of attention, sometimes overt, sometimes quiet. The answer to whether they are still watching cannot be given in a single night, but the evidence we have traced together suggests that attention, once focused, does not dissipate easily. It adapts, deepens, and persists.